This is an ABC News special report. Now reporting, George Stephanopoulos.
Good afternoon. We are coming on the air again because Michael Cohen, President Trump's former attorney, has just left the courthouse in the Southern District of New York in Lower Manhattan after pleading guilty to charges of tax evasion, bank fraud, and most significantly, campaign finance violations. He's facing years in prison. He will be released on $500,000 bond, but will also have to contribute about $500,000, forfeit $500,000 to the government, facing very serious charges. Unclear going forward. This is not a cooperation agreement, but unclear going forward what kind of cooperation he may give to the special counsel Robert Mueller or others investigating the president. We're about to hear shortly from the deputy U.S. attorney trying this case, prosecuting this case, Robert Kazami. But I want to bring in Tom Yamas first because, Tom, this is very significant. These two campaign finance violations that Cohen is pleading guilty to, connected to the payments to Karen McDougal, alleged to have an affair with President Trump back in the 2016 campaign, also to Stormy Daniels, the porn star, alleged to have an affair with President Trump. He is saying, Michael Cohen, he said it in open court, that he made these payments, these illegal payments, in coordination and at the direction of the candidate for President of the United States.
George, that's the bombshell right there. That's the headline out of this proceeding, that he did this, quote, at the direction of the candidate. And this is both with Karen McDougal and, as you mentioned, Stormy Daniels as well, with and at the direction of the same candidate. Of course, talking there about President Trump. A wild scene outside of court just now. Michael Cohen just left as people were screaming at him at the top of their lungs, lock him up, cursing at him as he got into his vehicle. A little bit of color from inside court. Michael Cohen walked in. He came in through a side entrance. He was protected, if you will, by the police and the FBI as he came in. Got inside. He was wearing a dark suit, a yellow tie. He winked at one reporter. He was asked at one point, since he was pleading guilty, if he was under any medication, if by any chance he was intoxicated. He said only that he had a drink last night, a 12-year Glenlivet, and that's usually not what he does. But it gives you a sense of what was going through his head. He's 4 days from his 52nd birthday, so definitely a rough week for him. And the max he could face right now, according from what we learned inside, could be 65 years. That's the maximum prison time. We know at this point sentencing is December 12th, but he did walk out on a $500,000 bond.
And again,
George?
There was no mention of cooperation, of a cooperation agreement inside that courthouse, but that doesn't preclude his cooperation, perhaps, with investigators going forward.
That's an incredibly important point, George. You're right. There is no cooperation. He doesn't have to cooperate with federal authorities, but the plea deal doesn't prevent him from doing that in the future, so that very well could happen.
Okay, again, he's been pleading guilty to 8 counts of campaign finance violations, tax evasion, and bank fraud. I want to bring in our chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams, for more on this. Facing some counts having to do with his personal business there, but Dan, the real news here, those campaign finance pleas, illegal corporate contribution, excessive campaign contribution at the direction of the candidate for president.
Well, that's right. You have to separate it out, because the ones with regard to tax fraud and bank fraud, that's related to him personally. That's a very different issue than when he's saying, I was directed to do something by the person that's clearly President Donald Trump. So in any other environment, we'd be saying, well, the next person to be charged here likely could be Donald Trump. But because, as we've talked about many times before, it is unlikely that the special counsel or anyone will seek to indict a sitting president. He could become a sort of unindicted co-conspirator. But regardless, Michael Cohen is making it very clear that he was directed to do this by the president, which actually makes the president's culpability here, if it's true, more significant than Michael Cohen, who's simply saying, I executed on his order.
And I want to bring in Chris Christie as well, another former prosecutor. Chris, the question there would be, what kind of documents or other evidence would the prosecutors be able to show to back up that contention from Michael Cohen? Apparently, we don't have Chris Christie right now. Let me go to Cecilia Vega at the White House. Cecilia, these claims from Michael Cohen, as he's pleading guilty to campaign finance violations, run right in the face of persistent denials we saw from the White House, from President Trump's aides, of any knowledge of anything having to do with the payments to Stormy Daniels or Karen McDougal, at least initially.
Exactly. And the explanations were and have been head spinning, from the campaign to the White House to the Trump legal team. And really, this is what put this administration facing smack in the middle of a crisis of credibility, George. Initially, Michael Cohen had said that this money came from his personal funds. Then we all remember that scene on Air Force One where the president denied knowing anything about the payments to Stormy Daniels. And then it just sort of spiraled out of control from there, where Rudy Giuliani, the president's lawyer, admitted that the president, in fact, did use this money from his personal account to pay Michael Cohen, but he said it was to stop what he called false and extortionist accusations, essentially to save his marriage, not because he was admitting any wrongdoing in these claims. That was for the Stormy Daniels case. The president ultimately did on Twitter acknowledge knowing about the payment, that the money came from his own account to Michael Cohen, and he says that this was something that was very common for rich people and celebrities to do. On the Karen McDougal case, there have been blanket denials from the very beginning of this campaign, where Hope Hicks, back then his longtime aide, denied the president doing anything wrong, knowing anything about these payments, and denying blanket denials about an affair. Giuliani just last month denied the president knowing anything about this transaction.
Cecilia, hold on a second, because we are now seeing Robert Kazami, the deputy U.S. attorney here in New York, who's prosecuting this case.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Robert Kazami. I'm the deputy United States attorney for the Southern District of New York and the attorney for the United States in this matter. With me is Bill Sweeney, assistant director in charge of the New York field office of the FBI, and James Robnett, who is the supervisory agent in charge of the New York office of the IRS. Also with me are the prosecutors from the United States Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York, who prosecuted the Cohen matter. I'm going to have a brief statement and will not be taking any questions. Today, as you heard, Michael Cohen pled guilty to 8 felony charges. 5 of those dealt with tax evasion for the years 2012 through 2016, in which he failed to report approximately $4.1 million in reported income. Approximately 2.5 of that money was from interest payments from a personal loan that he failed to report. Approximately $1.3 million of that money was from the operation of his taxi medallion business. Approximately $100,000 of that money was from brokerage commissions, and over $200,000 was from consulting fees. That's over $4.3 million over a 5-year period, which translates into a loss to the United States Treasury of approximately $1.3 million. In addition, in count 6, Mr. Cohen pled guilty to making false statements to a financial institution in connection with an application for a home equity line of credit. In that application, he failed to disclose more than $14 million in debt that he had, and as a result of that concealment, he obtained that $500,000 line of credit, which he would not have been entitled to had he been candid and honest. In addition, Mr. Cohen pled guilty to 2 campaign finance charges, one for causing an unlawful corporate contribution, and a second one for personally making an excessive personal contribution, both for the purpose of influencing the 2016 election. In addition, what he did was he worked to pay money to silence 2 women who had information that he believed would be detrimental to the 2016 campaign and to the candidate and the campaign. In addition, Mr. Cohen sought reimbursement for that money by submitting invoices to the candidate's company, which were untrue and false. They indicated that the reimbursement was for services rendered for the year 2017, when in fact those invoices were a sham. He provided no legal services for the year 2017, and it was simply a means to obtain reimbursement for the unlawful campaign contribution. A couple of points I'd like to make. First, these are very serious charges and reflect a pattern of lies and dishonesty over an extended period of time. They are significant in their own rights. They are particularly significant when done by a lawyer who, through training and tradition, understands what it means to be a lawyer, to engage in honest and fair dealing and adherence to the law. Mr. Cohen disregarded that training, disregarded that tradition, and decided that he was above the law, and for that he was going to pay a very, very serious price. With respect to the campaign finance violations, the campaign finance laws are designed to prevent the use of illegal money in elections and to maintain the integrity of those elections. Mr. Cohen made guilty pleas for those campaign violations, and those are core violations. And what he did was these pleas remind us that it is illegal for corporations to make contributions to candidates, and it is illegal to make contributions in excess of the amount that Congress set for individuals. That is a strong message today, and we will not be, we will not fear of prosecuting additional campaign finance cases. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, this case is unique in many ways. Just witness the gathering of all of you here today. And in other ways, it's unique as well. But in the really important ways, this case is not unlike many cases that my office, the United States Attorney's Office, brings, that the entire Department of Justice brings, and that the law enforcement agencies do as well, including the FBI and the IRS. This case has more in common with all those cases because they all share the same message. And that message is that the rule of law applies, and that for law enforcement, all of whom are gathered here, it is our commitment that we will pursue and vindicate those who choose to break the law, and vindicate the majority of people who live law-abiding lives, who follow honest and fair dealing, and live lives of lawful behavior. The message is that we are here, prosecutors are here, law enforcement is here, the Department of Justice is here, the law enforcement agencies here. We are a nation of laws, and the essence of this case is about is justice, and that is an equal playing field for all persons in the eyes of the law, and that is a lesson that Mr. Cohen learned today, and it is a very harsh one for him. Thank you very much.
Ringing statement there from Robert Kazami, the Deputy U.S. Attorney. Let's hear it. Hold on.
I'm sorry. I'd also like to introduce, my fault. I really want to thank Mr. Sweeney and James Robnett of the FBI and the IRS and the agents who work for them. We do many, many cases with them, and their determination and their fair dealing and their vigor with which they pursue their cases is really inspirational. To the prosecutors in my office, I cannot express the gratitude for the hard work that they did in this case, and that is Assistant United States Attorneys Andrea Griswold and Nick Roos and Rachel Maiman and Tom McKay, as well as Ed Discant, the Deputy Chief of the Public Corruption Unit, and Russell Capone, the Chief of the Public Corruption Unit. For all of these people, I could go on and on about their many virtues and talents, but the one important thing is they all are satisfied with simply being known as public servants, prosecutors, and law enforcement agents who are doing their job. Thank you very much.
Robert Kazami, Deputy U.S. Attorney, with a ringing statement there about the rule of law. I want to bring in a man who stood in those shoes as well. Chris Christie, a former U.S. Attorney in New Jersey as well, of course, also former governor of New Jersey. He said, Chris, that this case is unique in some ways, but not unlike so many other cases that U.S. attorneys face every single day, and it's sending the message the rule of law must stand. And as he said, a very harsh message today from Michael Cohen.
Well, a really harsh message, George. And he's right that the U.S. attorneys' offices across the country are doing cases like this every day. But he also noted that the presence of the media is there because this involves now, Michael Cohen has said publicly, that he was directed to do these things by then candidate Donald Trump, now President Trump. And so this is now going to come down to a credibility argument, George, that what things they have to prove that the president did in fact direct.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about, because we know that the special master and others have gone through thousands, hundreds of thousands of documents here, more than 1 million documents. We know that there is this is not a cooperation agreement, yet we've also seen this bombshell charge from Michael Cohen and an admission at the court saying he did this at the direction of the president. What does that mean for President Trump right now?
Well, listen, one, we know that this is not a normal circumstance because I think most people, legal experts, will agree that the president himself can't be indicted, that any kind of charges in that regard would have to be handled by Congress. But what I'd also say is that, now we understand perhaps why Michael Cohen and his folks were putting out that tape of he and then candidate Trump talking about the setting up of some type of mechanism to pay Stormy Daniels, and maybe now what the significance of that tape may be in Michael Cohen's mind. I'm sure we'll hear a different story from the president in the White House, but I think that tape now becomes, and whether there are any other tapes, becomes kind of significant.
And you
George.
mentioned this is a credibility case at this point. Isn't the president's case hurt by the fact that prior to this he had denied any knowledge of those payments and then was forced to admit that he knew about them?
Certainly, George. Every time that he's found to not having told the complete truth, the unvarnished truth about something, that's something that any group of folks in the position of deciding the facts of a case, are going to look at and say that's a factor to be considered. In the end, though, it's very interesting that Michael Cohen's not cooperating here, and this is a non-cooperating plea agreement. He looks at a huge sentence here potentially, and he's looking at some significant crimes, much more significant crimes in terms of monetary amount, George, on the stuff that was his own personal conduct than what we're talking about in terms of the campaign finance violations. Then those are the ones that are going to really drive his sentence. Right,
but that's what will drive the sentence. Final question to Dan Abrams, our chief legal analyst, as well. One, I guess, one of the open questions, I suppose, if both you and Chris Christie agree that it's unlikely, if not, that a president would be indicted, would not be indicted. The question is now, will this information go back to Robert Mueller, the information having to do with President Trump?
Oh, there's no question that it will. And the question you have to ask yourself is, if Cohen isn't telling the truth, why would he make this up? Why would he implicate himself in a crime that's going to add years to his sentence? It just doesn't make any sense if there's no cooperation agreement that he's sort of getting this enormous benefit by coming clean about. What is he getting from this? And I think that adds to the credibility of Cohen's plea here and of the truth as to what happened, because there doesn't seem to me to be a logical argument on the other side, apart from what I'm sure President Trump and Rudy Giuliani will say is he's just not telling the truth. He did this on his own. He's trying to blame President Trump for it. This was something that he, but the problem with that is you add that to the public statements that have now been made by Giuliani and Trump conceding the payments. And you're in a difficult position here with regard to credibility.
And I want to bring back our senior justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, as well. Pierre, this was given over, as I said, from Robert Mueller to the Southern District of New York, notoriously independent district. But they did report this back to the Justice Department before bringing Michael Cohen into court today. And this is something that Rod Rosenstein, who's now leading the entire investigation, was informed of.
Absolutely, George. Mueller was aware of all this that's going on. But one very important point here, this case is not potentially over because the charges mentioned that Cohen coordinated with other campaign officials. Those people are likely going to get a call from the FBI, a visit from the FBI. They will want to know what they know about this. They will seek additional corroboration. So this is potentially far from over, George.
That is a critical point. Not only that he acted at the direction of the president, but also that he coordinated with other members of the campaign, unnamed members of the campaign. Finally, I want to go to Cecilia Vega at the White House. We did not hear from the president before he headed to Charleston, West Virginia. As he was leaving the White House, no doubt he'll speak out on this tonight.
Certainly no doubt about that, George. This has not been a good day for this president, for this White House. On the same day that his personal attorney pleaded guilty, his campaign manager was found guilty, and perhaps the conservative website, the headline on Drudge right now says it all, George, Trump's hell hour. That's how this is being described.
Charges against his former campaign chair, against his former personal attorney, both. Paul Manafort convicted today on 8 charges of tax evasion and bank fraud. Michael Cohen pleading guilty today on charges of bank fraud and tax evasion and campaign finance violations connected to the 2016 presidential campaign. We're going to have a full wrap-up tonight on World News Tonight with David Muir, and I'll see you tomorrow on GMA.
And we're going to continue this special report here on ABC News Live. We want to bring in political director Rick Klein to talk again about Michael Cohen, the president's former personal attorney and fixer, pleading guilty now to 8 counts of campaign finance violation, tax evasion, and bank fraud. Rick, it sounds like the big focus politically is this campaign finance violations. The other counts seem to be more personal and what Cohen was doing with his finance. But the campaign finance violations seem to potentially tie in the president actually, because Cohen is saying Trump directed me to do these things. And not just that, but the part of the deal also says that one or more campaign officials worked with him on the Stormy Daniels deal, for example. So what does this all mean politically for the administration and the White House?
That is the key point. This is going to get bigger before it gets smaller, because once you start implicating the President of the United States, campaign officials, that suggests that we're closer to the beginning than the end of the story when it regards Michael Cohen. Even though he is pleading guilty to these charges and he hasn't signed any kind of a cooperating agreement, this information alone leads in all sorts of different directions. And it's telling that it has come home to roost, that you've had this moment where it has all come to account, because it does suggest that wherever things go with Robert Mueller, this is a separate probe. These answers are going to have to be made. And if it comes down to being a credibility question, as Governor Christie just suggested, President Trump in a very difficult spot given the now sworn testimony in this guilty plea from his former chief attorney, the guy that held the keys to the Trump kingdom for a long time.
And Mary Ellis Parks, our deputy political director, is also with us. And Mary Ellis, you know, this coming down just after we learned that Paul Manafort, Trump's former campaign chair, also has been found guilty on 8 criminal counts. What does this mean for the White House? And with the president about to speak at this rally, how do you position this politically if you're him?
On the one hand, the Mueller convictions the Mueller convictions in the Manafort trial speak to really Robert Mueller's work. There's the first salvo in what the special counsel has been doing, and really a win, maybe a partial, but a win for the special counsel, and proof that they're going to keep going forward. On the other hand, the Cohen story gets to the president's own legal challenges. Really a difference there. Not just what the special counsel is doing, but what the president might be implicated in is now directly implicated from Cohen's perspective in. And so we're talking about 2 totally separate cases with the president in the middle. And I keep coming back to the fact that we are still just under 3 weeks away from the midterms, where everything here in D.C. could change, because anything that would revolve around indicting the president, charging the president, getting a testimony from the president will be political questions that could really be decided on Capitol Hill. And if Democrats take the House, if Democrats suddenly have chairmanships and can subpoena more members of the White House, we're going to see this go to a totally new level.
And Rick, on that point, you know, heading into the election season, the president's reaction to this is incredibly important right now, and he has been nothing but unpredictable. Sometimes he keeps quiet and makes no comment. Other times he comes out swinging. What do you expect to see tonight, and what do you think his strategy will be going into these midterms?
I expect him to point out about today's news that the special counsel struck out on 10 of the 18 charges. Not a great batting average if you're spinning it from his perspective. Of course, Manafort faces many years in prison. The Cohen news, he has already effectively sidelined Michael Cohen, questioned his loyalty, questioned his practices throughout. I don't know that he's likely to attack him tonight. We'll see at this campaign event. Look, these campaign events have been a lot more about President Trump than they've been about the candidates he's out to represent. But it has been a mind-boggling couple of hours that just gets capped up with a rally. And look, I'll tell you, in terms of Trump supporters, you're starting to see it from reports of reporters in the room already. It's not like the Trump base is going to give up on him because of this. I'd imagine this is going to be met with a collective shrug from that crowd there in West Virginia. They're not going to really care about this news. But it does take a broader political toll across the country as this continues to unfold, and because we know that this continues to head in very uncomfortable directions for President Trump.
Quite an eventful couple of hours is right. Rick Klein, our political director in D.C. Thank you, Rick. So again, to recap for you, President Trump's former campaign chair, Paul Manafort, has been found guilty on 8 counts of tax fraud and bank fraud, or tax evasion and bank fraud, I should say. And now we're learning that the president's former attorney and fixer, Michael Cohen, has just pled guilty to 8 counts of tax evasion, bank fraud, and campaign finance violations. Those last set, the campaign finance violations, could actually tie back to not just the president, but other campaign officials. So more to come on this, all as the president himself is getting ready to speak at a rally in West Virginia. We, of course, will have the latest on all of that for you. For now, we are signing off at ABC News Live, but don't forget to check abcnews.com and your ABC News app for the latest on all of these developments as they continue to come out. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Have a great night.